Welcome to Chapter 1, the beginning of Anatomy and Physiology, Part 1, first semester. We'll be learning all about the human body, the anatomy, and the physiology of the human body. All right, so we're going to look at how the human body is organized. We have some major features of the human body here, and that includes the fact that we have cavities, membranes, and organ systems. Then we have the diaphragm that's going to separate two of the cavities. So let's look at these cavities real quick. Here we have the cranial cavity. Then you can see here the vertebral canal as it goes here. We have, so here's cranial, vertebral canal. Then we have the thoracic cavity, the abdominal cavity, and then we have those two together. We call it abdominopelvic cavity. When we have the abdominal cavity and the pelvic cavity together, we have the abdominopelvic cavity. And then here you can see the diaphragm. Let me take my pen off. The diaphragm here separating the thoracic and abdominal cavity. So we have serous membranes, and serous membranes line the walls of the thoracic and abdominopelvic cavity. They secrete a fluid that is going to separate the layer that lines the wall of the cavity, and we call that parietal, and the layer covering the organ, and we call that visceral. So visceral refers to things deep inside. Covering an organ would be a visceral layer, and parietal is going to line a body cavity or a body wall. Serous membranes secrete that fluid, separating the lining of the wall, remember, of the parietal layer and the layer covering the organ or the visceral layer. Visceral pleura are going to cover the lungs. So if they're covering the lungs, then they are superficial or above, outside, if you want to think of it that way, the lungs. Parietal pleura line the left and right thoracic compartments. Okay, so this is the outer layer. Visceral pericardium is going to cover the surface of the heart. Peri generally means around, and cardia refers to the heart, so pericardium means around the heart. Okay, and then visceral is telling us that it's covering that organ. So again, understanding what these words mean helps you to learn things better than just trying to memorize them. All right, so then we have the parietal pericardium, and that's the outer layer of the pericardium. Then we have the parietal peritoneum, which lines the walls of the abdominopelvic cavity. Visceral peritoneum covers most of the organs in the abdominopelvic cavity as well. All right, so here's what we call a transverse. So this is sliced through this way, and you're looking down from the top. Okay, so this is a section through the thorax, and it shows the serous membranes of the heart and the lungs. So this is a superior view. We're looking from above at a flat section where if we just basically, you can see in this picture here, this plane of section slicing that way. All right. So here you can see the lungs here, right here, and then here is the heart. All right. So we can see the different membranes here. So we have the visceral pleura here. Okay, remember that's going to be closest to the organ. Then we have the parietal pleura, and the pleural cavity. All right, so you can see these really outlined here with these different shades of colors to show you the different parts of the lining of these. The human body has got several organ systems, so we're going to look at each of these all throughout Anatomy 1 and 2. So here we're just going to get an overview of them. These each have a different set of interrelated organs that come together to form special functions. So the first one here is the integumentary system. This includes the skin and the accessory organs such as hair, nails, and sweat glands and sebaceous glands. These function in protection, regulation of body temperature, and they house sensory receptors. Next, we have the skeletal system, and its main function is support and movement. It contains the bones, ligaments, and cartilage, and it provides muscle attachment, actually stores some inorganic salts, and then produces blood cells. The muscular system, the function here is going to be movement. It's the main function. It's also a source of body heat, and it helps to maintain posture. Next, we have the nervous system, which is going to entail the brain, the spinal cord, nerves, and sense organs. Its function is to receive, interpret, and send information. It's kind of like the control center. Then we have the endocrine system, and that is going to secrete chemical messengers. So that includes things like the pituitary gland, your thyroid, parathyroid, adrenal glands, pancreas, ovaries, testes, pineal gland, and thymus. Now, you may be thinking ovaries and testes belong in the reproductive system, and yes, they do, but they also play a role here as well. Both of these, the nervous system and the endocrine system, help to coordinate different body functions, so they're very important. Here we have the cardiovascular system first. You can see this in the red and blue. We've got the heart, arteries, capillaries, veins, and blood. The function is to transport nutrients and gases, as well as hormones and waste products. Then we have the lymphatic system. That is going to include lymphatic vessels, lymph fluid, lymph nodes, thymus, and spleen. And the function is to transport fluids, defend, and also help to defend against pathogens, like it contains lymphocytes. It also helps with some waste products as well. Next is the digestive system. This includes the mouth, tongue, teeth, salivary glands, things like the pharynx, esophagus, stomach, liver, gallbladder, pancreas, and intestines. And the main function here is to digest and absorb nutrients, to obtain nutrients. Then we've got the respiratory system. This is how we move air in and out of the body and exchange gases. And of course, the all-important gas is to bring in oxygen and to release carbon dioxide. We have the nasal cavity, pharynx, larynx, trachea, and bronchi and lungs that are parts of the respiratory system. There are others as well. The urinary system includes kidneys, ureters, bladder, urethra. The main function is maintain water and electrolyte balance and remove waste. All right, so we've got the reproductive systems here. The male reproductive system includes the scrotum, testes, epididymis, ductus deferens, seminal vesicles, prostate gland, bulbourethral gland, urethra, and penis. Those are some of the structures there. The function is to produce and maintain the male sex cells and sperm cells, and then transfer these to the female reproductive tract. Also to produce male sex hormones, such as testosterone. Female reproductive system contains ovaries, uterine tubes, uterus, vagina, clitoris, vulva. The function here is to produce and maintain female sex cells, which are the egg cells, transport those cells, receive the sperm cells in order to promote the development of the embryo and to carry the fetus to term. So very important there. Excuse me. In each chapter, we're going to look at lifespan changes. How do things change throughout the course of our life from birth until senescence, which is old age or death, sorry. Usually this is like the very last slide, but in this unit, it's a little bit more important here because next we'll be looking at anatomical terms. So aging occurs microscopically, and then we see those changes at a whole body level. So changes for the tissues that occur at the tissue, cell, and molecular level. And that explains what we see as the familiar signs of aging. Gray hair, obtaining wrinkles. Those occur from things like decreased production of collagen and elastin and fat. This is why you get wrinkles, because your production of those is going to decrease. You don't have as much fat in your face. Changes in the way that the proportions of that body fat. Fat can also affect the way medications are metabolized. So this is why elderly people and children often metabolize medications a little bit differently than that range of ages in between. Cells have a predetermined number of cell divisions. They only are going to live for so long. They basically have a clock that tells them how long they can live. And yes, that is affected environmentally and genetically, but they do have a clock. So they have a predetermined number of cell divisions, and they can start to become impaired and worn out, and slow things like wound healing. The metabolism slows down, and that can cause cold intolerance and weight gain. And of course, like I said, we have environmental factors that affect that as well, but it is a natural lifespan change. Organ systems are interrelated, so age-related changings influences the function in different organ systems. So lastly, we're going to look at anatomical terminology. We're going to be looking at this in the lab as well. This is important because we want to be able to, and I've already stated this, but clearly describe the body, indicate the position of body parts and organs relative to one another. And like I said, if you have several wounds or several problems on a patient, you need to be able to describe them relative to one another. What if you have two bullet wounds that are side by side in the upper thigh? You've got to be able to relate that in a manner that is precise, accurate, and that everyone understands, so that everyone's on the same page. So this anatomical terminology is very, very important. So all of these terms assume that a body is in what we call anatomical position. This picture here is showing you anatomical position. This is standing erect or upright, facing forward, upper limbs hanging down to the side, palms facing forward, and thumbs out. So that way, when you describe if something is superior or inferior, if it is medial to the middle or lateral, which means to the side, everybody is assuming the same beginning position. Otherwise, it could get very, very confusing. Here are some of our orientation, and directional terms. Of course, they are kind of, well, no, they're not organizational. But anyway, so let's look at these. Superior means above, and these are kind of in pairs. They're really important to learn. There's a lot more of these, but these are really important to learn. Superior meaning above another part. So an example of that would be the thoracic cavity is superior to the abdominopelvic. Inferior means below, so the neck is inferior to the head or below the head. Anterior or ventral means towards the front, so the eyes are anterior to the brain. Posterior and dorsal means towards the back. The pharynx is posterior to the oral cavity, and you're going to learn what all those are. Medial means toward the midline, generally towards the midline of the body. So the nose is medial towards the midline of the body between the eyes, so it's medial to the eyes. Lateral is away from the midline, so the ears are lateral to the nose or to the eyes. They are lateral. They are on the side or to the side. All right, next we have bilateral, and that means there's a paired structure, so there's one on each side. So arms are bilateral, legs are bilateral, kidneys are bilateral, usually lungs, that type of thing. It's important to know that, so that when you have something that is bilateral, you can identify whether it's the right or left. Next we have ipsilateral, which means on the same side. So the right lung and the right kidney are ipsilateral. Then we have contralateral. What does contrary mean? It means opposite, right? So that means they're on opposite sides, contralateral, on opposite sides. So the right arm and the left leg are contralateral. Next we have proximal, and this means closest to the point of attachment. Point of attachment, that is important. The elbow is proximal to the wrist, okay? The elbow is nearest to the point of attachment. Okay, the wrist. Where I'm at. So let's see. All right, distal is further from the point of attachment. So that's the opposite of proximal. The fingers are distal to the wrist. They are further from the point of attachment. Superficial means close to the body surface, more external. So the epidermis of the skin is the superficial layer, or most outward, most to the closest to the surface of the body. And then deep is going to be more internal. So the dermis, the bottom layer of the skin, is the deep layer of the skin. We're going to be looking at these in lab as well, but they are possibly going to show up on your exam for lecture, so I'm going to make sure that you get them on both sides. All right. Sagittal. Body sections divide the body into segments. So sagittal means the right and left portions. Okay. If we say mid-sagittal or medium, that means dividing the body to right and left portions equally. Okay. If it's sagittal, it could be over to the side and not be right in the middle. Okay. So if it's equally, you can say mid-sagittal. So then we have transverse or horizontal. This is going to be breaking the body into superior and inferior, above and below. So cutting right in the middle. That's transverse and horizontal. And then we have coronal or frontal, and that is going to divide the body along here. If I was to cut myself along coronal wise, and knowing this is going to help you later learn, so we have certain markings on the skull that's called the coronal suture. And so if you remember what the coronal cut means, you'll remember the coronal divides this way. So you're going to have a frontal or anterior, and then the back or posterior portion. This picture here is showing you those three sections. So look at this very closely, okay? So you can see this plane here would be cutting the body in half along the midline, transverse, okay? And then frontal, you can see, is this plane, so cutting into front and back portions. And then we have the mid-sagittal plane is going to be cutting into right and left portions. This is again showing you here we have an A. What is this? I'm going to give you time to try to decide. Is this going to be transverse, sagittal, or frontal? Go ahead and stop the video and practice. Write down A, B, and C and write down the answers to this. So I'm going to pause this and let you write your answers down. Okay, so you should be back now. So if you said A was sagittal, you're correct. A is sagittal. B is, well, A means right and left portion, correct? You have a right and left portion there of the brain in that cut. B, the brain is cut transverse. So you have a top and a bottom, right? And in C, it is frontal. So you have a front or an anterior portion and a posterior portion. So if you got all those right, good job. Here are some other things that are some other ways that you can have something cut. This is for cylindrical parts like bones. You can have a cross section. You can see that's basically transverse. You can have an oblique section, which is going at a diagonal. And then you can have what we call longitudinal, that is going all the way down the length of something. Okay, so what we have is we have the right hypochondriac region. Remember, hypo means above. You want to remember that you're looking at your patient, so you have the right of your patient and the left of your patient. And it's very easy or natural to want to confuse that. So one thing that I like to do is to go ahead and write on there right and left so I don't confuse it. Okay, so chondriac refers to this portion of the ribs here. But if you remember hypo, actually that means below, so below the ribs. So right hypochondriac region. Epi means above. Gastric refers to the stomach, so above the stomach. And then the left hypochondriac division there. We've got 9 regions here that we're looking at. So we have 9 regions and 4 quadrants. I forgot to point that out. So next you have the right lumbar region. Lumbar is referring to the lower portion of your back. And then the left lumbar over here. So left lumbar, right lumbar, and then the umbilical region. Well, what do you think is in the umbilical region? Your belly button, right? Your belly button, where your umbilical cord was. So then we have the right iliac and left iliac. And remember, hypo means below. Gastric refers to the stomach, so below the stomach, so hypogastric region. So you need to know these terms, and I promise you these are even going to be on the midterm because these are just that important. So really learn these, okay? So if we're talking about just quadrants, it depends on how technical or how specific you need to be. Sometimes a quadrant is good enough, and sometimes you need to get into the more specific, where we're looking at the 9 regions. But if we're looking at quadrants, those are pretty easy. So you have the right upper quadrant, left upper quadrant, right lower quadrant, and left lower quadrant. You wouldn't believe, though, the number of people that miss this and get it wrong. So remember, patient's right and patient's left, not your right and left. And that really kind of sums it up. Be sure to know these body regions, study these body regions, and draw them out and label them. That's the best way to learn it, is drawing.